The first time Eli Whitaker saw her eyes, everything stopped. It was just past dawn, the sky still gray and swollen from the night storm, when he opened the cabin door and met her stare. She stood at the edge of the porch, a wild bobcat the size of a mountain lion, her coat thick with snow, her shoulders coiled with silent power, her golden eyes locked on his like searchlights through fog. She didn't snarl. She didn't move, and neither did Eli. His breath caught somewhere in his chest. His fingers froze around the door frame. Behind him, 5 small shapes stirred on the rug by the fire, tiny cries rising up in recognition. The cubs. His throat tightened. She was their mother. The storm hadn't killed her. She had found them. And now she stood within striking distance of him, the old man who'd brought them in. She took one slow step toward the open door. Snow crunched under her weight. Her eyes never left his. Eli knew in his bones what she could do. One leap, one claw. That's all it would take, and no one would ever know. There wasn't another soul within miles. But she didn't leap. She didn't growl. Instead, she blinked once, slowly, and crossed the threshold. The night before, the wind had howled like it was tearing through the very bones of the forest. Eli sat by the wood stove with his dog-eared notebook, a half-filled mug of instant coffee trembling on the side table. He hadn't written in weeks, maybe months, but the silence tonight felt heavier than usual. The fire cracked. Outside, snow hammered the window panes. Then he heard it, a scratch, soft. Then again, quicker this time. Eli frowned, reached for the flashlight. Raccoons, maybe, or a coyote looking for shelter. He creaked open the cabin door and was hit with a wall of freezing wind. The storm was a white curtain. He squinted, holding the beam steady, and that's when he saw them. 5 tiny figures, huddled together on the porch steps, shaking, ice clinging to their fur, one slumped to the side, not moving. The others pressed in around it, crying out in small, sharp yelps that didn't sound human or animal, just scared. At first he thought they were kittens, big ones. But then he saw the ears, tufted and pointed. The paws, thick, cracked, bleeding. Lynx cubs. Wild. His heart thumped hard. Logic screamed, "Shut the door, walk away. Let nature do what it does." But something else moved in him, something older. He crouched down slowly, muttering soft nothings as he peeled off his jacket. Their tiny bodies barely weighed a thing. They didn't resist. They were too cold to care. Eli wrapped them in flannel and carried them inside. He didn't know then that they would change everything. The cabin filled with a kind of silence Eli hadn't known in years. Not empty, but watchful. He laid the cubs out one by one near the stove on an old braided rug. Their fur was matted with ice, ears drooped, bellies hollow. He pulled his old army blanket from the chest, the one his late wife used to wrap around herself on winter mornings, and tucked it around them gently. It still carried her scent faintly, cedar and lavender, familiar comfort. They didn't resist. One of the kittens let out a dry, rasping sound. Not quite a meow, not quite a cry, just a plea. Eli moved like someone who remembered things with his hands, a saucepan of warm water. The last of the smoked moose strips, softened in broth. A worn dish towel to rub frost from ears and paws. He didn't speak at first, just breathed, moved, kept them alive later, long after the stove had glowed red and the wind had begun to lull. He sat beside them on the floor. "You picked the right porch, little ones," he murmured, voice low and gravelly. but you're in the wrong world for mercy. One stirred at the sound of his voice, crawled forward unsteadily, and curled beside his knee. Eli didn't move. Something inside him cracked, softly, quietly. Not pain, not sadness, more like remembering. He sat like that for hours, half asleep, half listening to the storm beat against the roof. The cubs breathed in a fragile rhythm, one twitching in dreams, another nestling against the fold of the blanket. His wife would have loved this, would have named them all, would have said it meant something, them showing up now after all these years of silence. He almost spoke to her aloud, caught himself. Instead, he whispered to the kittens. "We'll get through the night," he said. "If you stay quiet and I keep the fire alive, we'll see tomorrow." And for the first time in what felt like a decade, Eli Whitaker didn't feel entirely alone. Outside, the blizzard screamed, but inside, a heartbeat of warmth remained. Until the morning came, and with it, something else. The scratching started again, but not small this time. It was heavy, deliberate. Wood scraped beneath weight. Eli froze mid-step. The air felt different, pressurized, ancient. He reached for the poker, eyes locked on the door, because whatever was outside now, it wasn't looking for warmth. It was looking for what was missing. The sound came again, this time deeper. A slow drag across the porch boards, weight shifting, claws ticking wood. Eli's grip tightened on the iron poker, his knuckles white. Behind him, the cubs stirred under the blanket. One let out a squeaky trill. Recognition. He felt it in his spine before he processed it in his mind. A knowing older than thought. This wasn't a stranger at the door. This was family. And family had come back. His breath turned to steam as he stepped toward the door. The stove heat couldn't touch the chill crawling up his neck. He paused just inches from the latch. The scratching stopped. Now only silence. But not the safe kind. The kind that holds breath. The kind that waits to see what you'll do. He could shut the door, lock it, wait it out. But something in him knew. If he didn't open it now, on his own terms, whatever waited out there might find another way in. He closed his eyes, drew one breath, then another, and pulled the door open. The wind didn't rush in like before. It crept. Snow swirled in lazy spirals, and there she stood, massive, silent. Her coat was matted with snow, glinting like glass, her paws, wide and sure, pressed deep into the drift. Her tail flicked once, slowly. And her eyes, they were gold. Not yellow, not amber. Gold. Like old coins and dry wheat. Like firelight seen through tears. She didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth. She just stared. Right through him. Eli's throat closed. He couldn't move, couldn't blink. He felt like he was being measured. Not for harm, not for fear, but for truth. What kind of man opens his door to something like this? And what kind of mother walks into a human's home for the sake of her children? She stepped forward once. The boards groaned under her weight. Still, Eli didn't move. He lowered the poker. "They're alive," he said softly. "They're warm." She didn't respond, but the moment held. And then, without sound, she crossed the threshold, walked past him, and went straight to them. The cubs burst out from the blanket in a chorus of yelps, tumbling over each other. She met them halfway, lowering her massive head as they pressed into her chest. A sound rumbled from deep in her throat. Not a warning, not a growl. A purr, low, thunderous. The floor itself seemed to vibrate. And Eli, standing inches from her, could do nothing but watch. He had invited in the wild, and the wild had answered, not with fury, but with trust. For a long time, Eli didn't move. He stood at the edge of the rug, still gripping the doorframe, eyes locked on a scene that shouldn't exist. A wild mother, wrapped around her children in the middle of a human cabin, surrounded by man-made walls, firelight, and the scent of old wood. She didn't look at him. Not yet. She was busy. Counting, nuzzling, reassuring herself. Her body formed a wide arc around the cubs. She licked their ears, pawed them gently into place, purred so deep it made the windows hum. Eli slowly backed away, heart pounding. He set the poker down carefully. No sudden moves. He eased into his chair, the same one he'd sat in for a decade, every night alone. Only tonight, he wasn't alone. They were here, all of them, breathing the same air, sharing the same warmth. He watched the bobcat lift her head and finally look at him. The gaze wasn't hostile, not anymore. It was aware, ancient. And then she blinked. One slow blink, deliberate and calm. Eli blinked back without thinking. He'd seen cats do it before. His wife used to say it meant trust. He wondered if that still held true, even now, even here, with a creature more wild than any house cat could dream to be. The day passed without words. The storm hadn't stopped. Snow packed against the windows. Wind whispered through the chinks in the logs. But inside, the room was warm. The bobcat lay curled with her cubs, occasionally shifting to shield them from drafts. Eli placed a plate of meat strips nearby, then retreated. She didn't move at first. But later, when he looked again, the food was gone. She had eaten, on her terms, and that meant something. He kept the fire going through the evening, stepping around them like sacred stones. When he laid more wood on the flames, the mother watched, alert but calm. He didn't speak much. Just the occasional murmur to the fire or to the memory of his wife. She would have sat right beside him, notebook in her lap, sketching the whole scene. He could almost hear her voice. "Do you get it now, Elle? This is what healing looks like. Unexpected. Untamed." That night, Eli didn't go upstairs. He slept in the chair, boots still on, blanket over his lap. The sound of 6 wild hearts breathing was enough to hold back the dark. And in the middle of the night, when the fire popped loud enough to wake him, he looked over and saw her staring at him, not with threat, but with acknowledgement. And something inside him settled. He hadn't just saved their lives. They'd saved something in him, too. Something he hadn't known was dying. The second morning came with silence. Not the violent hush of snowfall, but the kind that comes after something important has passed. The storm was over. Eli woke with a stiff neck, blanket still clutched in his hands, and a strange weight in his chest that felt both heavy and light. He looked toward the hearth. They were still there. The mother lay with her back to the fire. Cubs nestled between her limbs, their fur rising and falling in contented sleep. One kitten had its paw resting on her face. Eli couldn't stop staring. No one would believe this. Hell, he barely believed it. He got up slow, joints popping, body aching in that deep, winter-old way. He made coffee, careful not to clatter the tin too loud. She watched him, just her eyes. Not with distrust anymore, with awareness. And something else. He moved about the kitchen, placing small pieces of meat near her side again. She waited until he backed away, then reached a paw forward and pulled it toward her mouth. He let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. They had rules now, not spoken, not agreed upon, but real. Outside, the snow had piled waist-high against the barn. Trees sagged under the weight. The world looked like it had been erased and rewritten in white. Eli stood at the window, coffee in hand, staring at the glassy calm. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to fill the silence with a radio or his own voice, or even the creak of a floorboard. The wild had come to him, and instead of taking something, it had given. That afternoon, he sat by the fire and pulled out the old photo album. Dusty leather, cracked spine. He turned the pages slowly, watching faces drift back from years ago. His wife, smiling in a red flannel. A younger version of himself beside her, holding up a fishing pole like a trophy. There was one photo of the porch. Summer wildflowers bursting in pots beside the steps. That same porch now held paw prints pressed deep in snow. He didn't speak to the animals. Not directly. But when he flipped to the last page, an empty one, he looked up at the lynx mother. "I never thought I'd see anything worth adding here again," he whispered. She blinked once, shifted slightly. The cubs stirred, then quieted. That night, as the fire burned low, Eli left the door slightly cracked, just a few inches, not out of carelessness, but choice. If she wanted to go, she could. If she wanted to stay, the space was hers. And sometime near midnight, he woke to the faint creak of the boards and saw her standing in the doorway, framed by the last of the embers. She turned her head, looked at him, held his eyes, then turned back to the dark, but she didn't leave. She stepped outside just far enough to breathe the night air, and then returned. Eli didn't sleep after that. He just watched the stars through the window and listened to the quiet breathing of a wild family that wasn't his, but somehow was. The third morning, the sun returned. It crept over the ridgeline like someone unsure they were welcome, painting the snow in gold and pink. Light spilled through the frosted windows, brushing against the floorboards and the sleeping forms curled near the stove. Eli stood on the porch, mug steaming in his hand, boots sunk ankle-deep in snow. The world was so quiet, it almost rang. Birdsong hadn't returned yet. The trees were still stunned into stillness, but the storm had passed, and they were alive. He heard the cabin creak behind him, then the soft pad of paws. He turned slowly. She stood in the doorway. The mother, framed in light, watching him. Not challenging, just present. He nodded once. She didn't blink. That afternoon, she ate while he was still in the room. No retreat, no pause. Just a slow, deliberate pull of meat toward her jaws, her eyes occasionally drifting to his. And each time, Eli felt a tremor in his chest, like standing too close to something sacred. He didn't speak much, but when he did, he kept his voice low, like talking to ghosts. "I never thought I'd share this space again," he said one evening, "not with anyone that breathes." She listened, or at least didn't leave. That night, just before the fire died low, she stood. Her muscles shifted like water under fur. She looked at the door, then at him, and waited. Eli hesitated, heart thudding. But then he rose and opened the door wide. She walked past him, cubs trailing behind her like shadows, and stood in the clearing. Moonlight caught the edge of her coat. She didn't bolt. She turned, looked back. One slow breath passed between them. Then she vanished into the trees. Eli stood in the doorway long after, the cold forgotten. The rug near the stove still held their warmth. and on it, 5 tiny paw prints pressed into the fabric. He didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, but reverence. He kept the fire alive, sat in the chair, and waited. When dawn came again, the cabin was empty. But the silence no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like memory, like promise, like maybe, just maybe, they weren't gone for good. Winter faded slowly that year. The days stretched longer, light returning in golden ribbons through the pine boughs. But Eli's world remained quiet. The fire crackled. The creek began to thaw. Rabbits darted across snow patches that now melted underfoot. The bobcats didn't come back. Not at first. But there were signs. Small ones. A half-eaten snowshoe hare left neatly beside the stacked wood. A fresh track near the stream. Too wide for a fox, too quiet for a coyote. Once he caught the glint of something amber in the trees, but it vanished before he could step onto the porch. He never chased it. He just nodded, as if to say, "I know you're still out there." Weeks passed. He went on with his life, chopping wood, checking traps he never sprung, boiling coffee in the same dented tin pot. But something in him had shifted. He moved with more presence. He spoke aloud more often, to himself, to the trees, to the space beside the fire, to them. Then one evening, as the sky turned that exact shade of coppery violet that only happens in late spring, Eli stepped outside with his coffee and froze. They were there, not on the porch, but just beyond the clearing where the grass dipped into a grove of birch and alder. The mother stood tall, her frame now sleek with health, eyes glowing in the twilight. And the cubs, no longer cubs at all. They had grown. Their legs longer, coats fuller, movements more deliberate. But he knew them. The smallest one still tilted its head the same way. The boldest still stepped slightly ahead of the rest. They didn't come closer. They didn't have to. They simply stood, all 6 of them, watching him from the trees. Eli's knees weakened. He reached for the porch railing and held on. Tears stung his eyes without warning. Not sadness, not even joy, just awe. One of the younger bobcats let out a soft trill, the same sound he'd heard that first night, nearly buried under snow. Eli nodded slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," he said, "for remembering." The mother didn't blink. She just stared a moment longer. Then, without sound, turned. The cubs followed. One by one, they melted into the dusk, like they had never been there at all. Except they had been. And that made all the difference. Eli didn't see them again that season. But that was all right. They had returned once, and once was enough to rewrite the quiet. Spring stretched into summer. The porch thawed. The birches filled with green, and inside the cabin, something long dormant had taken root again. He found himself leaving the door cracked during evenings. Not wide open, not expectant, just open enough to say, "You're welcome." Sometimes he'd catch a rustle in the brush, a shadow moving just beyond sight. Once he found claw marks on a tree near the clearing, fresh, high, proud. He smiled at that. One morning in late July, Eli returned from gathering firewood to find something on the porch. A single feather, long, white with gray flecks, resting on the worn rail where his wife used to sit with her tea. He stood for a long time holding it, then placed it beside the photograph on the mantel. Not everything needed an explanation. Some things just needed to be witnessed. He began writing again. Not about loss, not about grief, but about wilderness and mercy and the way something untamed can still carry kindness in its bones. He kept the old blanket folded near the stove, washed it once, but never replaced it. He still talked aloud sometimes, to the fire, to the trees, to whatever might be listening. And every so often, just before sleep, he'd hear a sound, soft, deliberate, like a paw on old wood. He wouldn't get up, wouldn't check. He'd just close his eyes and listen, because he knew what it meant. And in the stillness of his little cabin, warmed by memory and flickering light, Eli Whitaker no longer felt alone. The mountains had remembered, and so had she.